Many of those beautiful cars have diesel engines from tractors under the hood. Some run on motors pulled from boats, others use carburetors from Soviet buses. This is the story of how Cuba became the world's strangest automotive time capsule. Until the First World War, until 1914, 153 different car manufacturers were registered in Cuba. We're talking about the early days of the auto industry, and that's something that didn't exist even in the biggest European or American cities. Strong opposition to that regime developed, led by the Marxist Fidel Castro. Along with his rebels, he overthrew Batista. So in 1959, an armed revolt took place, a real state of war. The Americans ran away, and Castro's communists nationalized everything they left behind, including cars. Among the cars were not only American models, but also Mercedes, Porsche, and Jaguars. But still, most were Chevrolets, Fords, and Plymouths driven by taxi drivers, plus Lincolns, Buicks, and Chryslers owned by hotel and casino operators. From that moment on, mass export of American cars to Cuba stopped, and from then on, the so-called automobile time capsule was created that continues to this day. Due to the nationalization of American property and the fear of communism, in 1962, President Kennedy passed a law and banned all trade and financial transactions between the US and Cuba. So the Cubans had no choice but to import cars from their friends in the Eastern Bloc. At that time, Moskvich 403 and 407, Volga 21, and GAZ 53 trucks started arriving in Cuba. You can see all of those even today on Cuban streets. In fact, according to many sources, Soviet cars quickly exceeded the number of American cars. Even today, there are probably more Soviet cars than American ones. But the American cars simply attract more attention, so you have the impression that absolutely everyone drives American cars, which simply isn't true. Now, at that time, those Soviet cars couldn't just be bought freely. The state strictly controlled the economy and market, so the state actually distributed those cars according to party merits. What was a problem with almost all communist regimes was also a problem in Cuba. At the top of the party, they got to use the last cars imported from the US. Camilo Cienfuegos, the leader of the guerrillas, got an Oldsmobile 98 from 1959. Of course, Fidel Castro himself adored Oldsmobiles. Despite the American embargo, he managed to get 12 Oldsmobiles to Cuba, which he shared with his bodyguards. Interestingly, one of these cars is still alive and has a diesel engine from a Korean car. However, of all the leaders of the revolution, the most interesting is Che Guevara, who didn't even have a driver's license. In Latin America, he rode exclusively on his Solex moped. He learned how to drive a car in Cuba during the Revolutionary War in a Jeep stolen from Batista's army. After the revolution, he got some Studebaker. However, since that car was a piece of junk, they let him choose among the confiscated cars. He chose a mint green Chevrolet Bel Air from the early 60s, one of the last cars imported from America. Of the legendary cars of the leaders of the revolution, I have to mention the Alfa Romeo 175, which Fidel Castro allegedly received as a gift from Italian communist Palmiro Togliatti. The arrival of Soviet cars created an incredible automotive ecosystem. You'd have a 20-foot Cadillac parked on the street next to a tiny Lada. Even stranger, those two cars could often share the same parts. Simply put, spare parts for American cars were quickly used up. Parts couldn't be imported. And then the so-called cultura de resolver developed, which in translation means culture of problem solving. How did it work? Most Soviet cars were owned by the state, while American cars were mostly privately owned. As you know, Russian cars rusted quickly. When you add salty sea air to that, those cars would fall apart very quickly. So state mechanics removed parts from scrap vehicles and sold them on the black market. In addition, the same mechanics worked privately in their garages in some gray zone of the law. Underground networks of car owners were formed, people who knew what could be fixed and repaired. For example, Cuban mechanics discovered that by some miracle, the carburetor from the Soviet bus PAZ-672 fits on Chrysler Hemi engines, or that the headlight from Moskvich 408 is the same size as the Impala from 1959, or that the Volga steering rack is compatible with Fords from the mid-1950s. However, For many failures in American cars, they simply had no solution. So you had two options: get rid of that car and wait for the state to give you a Lada or Moskvich, or the option Cubans use very often, put in another engine. And that's usually a diesel. Not just from a car, but even from a tractor or a boat. In 1974 and 1975, a window opened when non-Soviet vehicles from Argentina somehow reached Cuba. At that time, Latin American countries wanted to trade with Cuba. Argentina sent a solid amount of Ford Falcons, Chrysler Avengers, Peugeot 404s, and Renault 12s of Argentinian production. For Cubans, these were top cars at the time. However, the Americans immediately put pressure on Argentina to cut the trade. So it was one of the last waves of Western cars during the Cold War. Mexico tried to trade too, but to avoid the Cold War mess, they stopped direct car exports. Cuba is one of the most famous countries in the world when it comes to medicine. Cuba became the country with the largest number of doctors per capita. So the Cubans made a deal with the Mexicans, send them doctors and professional workers, and Mexico would send about 5,000 VW Beetles of Mexican production. Those same Beetles were given to doctors. So Cubans call them Vojo de Médico, that is the medical Beetle. Then, through the Communist Council for International Economic Assistance, the Poles gave them their national car, the Fiat 126P. It became the only car that could be bought in Cuba in free sale in the 1980s. Of course, this car can still be seen on Cuban streets, even today. The 90s brought big changes in Cuba when it comes to cars. Apart from Lada, which continued to be sold in Cuba, most Soviet cars stopped being produced. Also, most countries stopped supporting the American embargo. The first country to start selling cars in Cuba was France, although it was more for rental car agencies. To this day, those Peugeot 405s are perhaps the most modern cars you'll see. What also changed beginning in the early 2000s was the opening of Cuba for tourism. Of course, the phenomenon of colorful American classic cars played a key role here, along with Cuban rum, cigars, and salsa. That means the car ceased to be just a means of transportation and became a source of income for entire families. Although most of these cars haven't been mechanically close to factory condition for a long time, with a little investment in paint and interior, tourists don't care what's under the hood, whether it's a Volga motor or some diesel from a commercial vehicle. Also, many Cubans cut the roofs off these American classics and converted them into convertibles. Maybe we car enthusiasts can tell the difference, but tourists don't care. In a convertible, it's a much better experience for a city tour. Many of you will probably say, how stupid is it for them to destroy those cars? However, to understand this, we need to know that the average doctor's or professor's salary in Cuba is about $10. Monthly salary, $10. In the best case, some jobs bring $20 to $25 monthly, maximum. Now imagine how valuable those cars are when a rich tourist comes and leaves you a tip worth a monthly salary, and you have 10, 15, 20 of those tourists a day. For that reason, you have workshops that make gaskets from tractor tires, brake fluid from shampoo, brown sugar, and alcohol. In the last few years, there have been more and more body shops able to cut the roof and strengthen the frame. When American classics represent such an important and large part of the economy of a whole country, recently Cubans even banned the export of cars produced before 1959. Since 2011, the law has been reformed to allow private individuals to buy new cars without restrictions. But when you have a monthly salary of $10, that doesn't change much in your life. So that only changed something for rental car agencies, which bought a certain amount of Korean and Chinese cars. What many people don't know is that Cuba from pre-revolution times wasn't just American cars, but also serious exotic cars. For a long time, there was a myth about a Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing. It was talked about on forums for years, but only around 2014 did proof of this story appear when it was found by photographer Miguel Lorente, however, in very bad condition. In the same yard, he found a Hispano Suiza, a Chrysler Special Coupe by Ghia, and an Abarth 750 Zagato, which was being used as a chicken coop. If you go, not only can you see everything on the street, but they even have two car museums. You can see a Cadillac from 1905, a replica of the Maserati that Fangio drove at the Cuban Grand Prix, donated Jaguars from the British Embassy, and a Rolls-Royce from 1926. Of course, there's more, but that's what I would pick out as the most interesting cars. If you enjoyed this journey through Cuban automotive history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the road. Thank you for your attention and have a nice day.